We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today we have with us somebody that you may know, Sam Sorbo. Welcome, Sam.
Well, howdy. It's good to be here with you.
Sam, I just learned, left her California digs and has moved to Florida. So now we're neighbors for part of the year. That's great.
Yes, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
We are so loving Florida. And of course, we left before COVID, thankfully. So we weren't part of that mass exodus, but it did take the fires to finally get us out of California.
Yeah. There have been a lot of things going on, and Florida has been a very welcoming place for many people, and I'm excited about what's going on there because of it. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, a lot of growth here.
I'm in Pennsylvania today, and so I'm not putting up with that summer heat at the moment. But I want to hear about your background, your upbringing, your family, your education, and that sort of thing to kind of set the stage for talking about some of your initiatives in telling people about how to handle public education and some of your experiences related to Hollywood.
Absolutely. Where would you like to start?
Well, I'd like to hear about you, your upbringing,
Okay.
and your family and education. How's that?
Fair enough. I was the fourth of four girls, born to a woman who soon divorced my father. So I never knew him. I went to public school all the way through. I was quite an academic, although I hated school. I was pretty much a straight A student. As you've already pointed out, I went to Duke University, but I didn't actually end up graduating high school, and I also didn't end up graduating Duke, although I did study biomedical engineering. So I am what you call an academic, basically.
How do you
And
go to
so
Duke without finishing high school?
they didn't double check. So I was on track to graduate high school, but I spent my senior year abroad in Sweden. And so they accepted me while I was abroad in Sweden, and then my high school refused to graduate me because I was lacking one course. And actually, this is actually an interesting part of the story. So the course that I was lacking for high school was American history for some reason. And Duke insisted that I take an American history course. And I hated history in school. They make it so boring on purpose, I will say. They make it just unpalatable. And so Duke insisted that I take an American history course, and I was like, ugh. So I had an option to take like history for jocks, or like the hardest course, which was a seminar course, which means you sit around a big table with 12 students and a professor, and the spotlight is basically on you for the entire semester.
Right.
And so the choice was basically an easy grade, but I most likely would fail because it would be too easy and I wouldn't apply myself, or I would be forced to apply myself. So I took the harder course, and I fell in love with history because that professor loved history and wanted us to really understand it and embrace it. And that's how I learned to love history, because it was taught in a very palatable manner.
And it was meaningful. So much of my educational history course, my history courses in my K-12 education especially, were taught in such a way that they seemed meaningless.
Yes, you make my point for me. So history is a story. It should be the most interesting course in our school curricula. It's not, because people don't know how to teach it. And I think that's because it's been so drastically perverted by our institutions that are really focused on grades, right? They're focused on statistics.
Yeah.
Never mind that the statistics are going down every year. It just gets worse and worse. They keep focusing on the same thing, getting a worse result and expecting a better outcome. And I think someone said that that's the definition of insanity. I'm not sure, but I'm just saying.
I'd go with that.
And so what I learned is, if you want to teach your kids history, tell them stories. And by the way, the best storybook known to mankind really is the Bible.
Yeah.
And so in any case, fast forward to, I had 3 kids. I had already chosen my husband over my career because my fiance at that time had 3 strokes, and so I was forced into making this binary decision between being with him and helping him heal from 3, bullets to the brain, or really pursuing my career and maybe actually forfeiting a relationship with him, because who knew how that was going to end up if I chose my career over him. And I decided that I was really more interested in a family and marriage than a career. And that was a difficult admission to make, in a sense, because I was raised by virtually a single mom, to get a job, get a career, make a living for myself, and then consider perhaps getting married, having children.
Kind of protect yourself from the difficulties that she experienced, maybe?
There was some of that, and there was also just an absolute lack of morality, in the sense of go and have as much sex as you want, and if you get pregnant, you just have an abortion. It's easy. There's no problem there. And so there was really kind of a disdain overall for family, marriage, traditional values, basically.
Yeah.
And I rejected that, and that's just my character. It wasn't a cognitive thing, like, oh, my values are this, but I was raised with these values. That's weird. Yeah. It wasn't like that. It was just that I slowly discovered who I was. And in that moment in the hospital room,
through that?
I became a Christian when, so it's a little bit of a convoluted story, but I quit Duke because I started modeling because I was giving myself an ulcer and I needed to take a year off. So I modeled for the year, made a ton of money, went back to Duke, and then sort of said to myself, what am I doing? I'm paying a lot of money. And I was on scholarships and stuff, but it still cost me money to go to Duke.
Duke's expensive.
To pursue one thing. Well, if I do this one other thing instead, I can make a lot of money and do everything else. So I can pursue one thing and it's going to cost me in the long run, because I was headed toward medical school. That was going to be expensive, right? Or I could choose this, make a lot of money, and do everything else that I ever wanted to do with my life, which included acting. And so modeling, of course, was a segue to acting. And so I decided to pursue that. And in the process of pursuing that, making a lot of money, I thought, oh my gosh, I did it. I did exactly what they told me to do. I made a lot of money. I'm a success. Now what?
Yeah.
Like, stick a fork in me? I'm done? Like, should I just off myself because I did it? I achieved the A. I got the grade, right? And so I went on a search for meaning. And I discovered order in the universe, which led me to God, of course. And then I read the Bible. And so just one thing followed after the other, and I became saved. So yeah, it's it's sort of a ridiculous story, but I think that's how God writes the story, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it was immediately after your experience at Duke that you came to faith?
Well, immediate, define immediate. It was a year or two.
In the time shortly after. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. What difference did that make in terms of choices that you ended up making at that point?
Well, my fear went away. I was raised with a great deal of fear. Oh. And once I realized that there was a creator, and no less a creator who loved me, my fear dissipated. And so my decisions were made much more level-headed. Fear prevents thought. Fear is an obstacle to rationality. And so I just, things became much clearer. And one thing that I like to tell, particularly young ladies, but young people in general, and people in general, is every decision is binary. Now in school, they teach you to make pros and cons lists. It's gone viral now. Everybody thinks, make a pros and cons list, that'll help you make the decision, but it never does, because you end up looking at both sides of the list and you're just sort of going back and forth and going, oh, well, I've got 6 on this side, but 5 on this side, but this one's more important than that one. So how do I evaluate them, right? And I just tell people every decision is binary. You need to put your priorities in place. You make the decision based on the highest priority. If your highest priority doesn't decide it for you, the next one will. And if it's not that one, it'll be the next one. And so it's not making a list of pros and cons, it's making a list of priorities. And then everything becomes a lot clearer. And
That's really, there's a lot of profundity in there. Don't go past that too quickly. The whole way of making decisions there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said.
Thank you.
Yeah. The prioritization of a decision makes a lot more sense than looking at both sides of an equation or both sides of an issue.
And looking at both sides creates confusion, which I would argue is a desired outcome for some people, right? But if you have your priorities straight, you will never regret your decisions.
I like that. Well, now let's just touch real quickly. Your family, you have 3 children?
I do.
And they're getting into young adulthood, as I understand it today.
22, 20, and 18.
But it keeps changing.
It does. Every year.
It's hard to keep up with. It keeps changing. That's wonderful. So
yes.
One of the things that I know that has been a significant priority and initiative for you is K-12 education. How did that come about? It's interesting to hear your background in education, something I didn't know. I love that story. That's great. But how did your interest in really focusing a lot of your work on communicating the importance of certain things in education, and what are they? What are the priorities that you have really tried to impress on the people that you've had the chance to influence?
So there are a couple of ways to approach that. First of all, we moved for the schools. We wanted our children to go to the best schools possible, so we actually moved house. And then my oldest went through 1st and 2nd grade at this lovely, well-populated, well-admired public school. The teachers were all really nice. And I was disappointed. I grew very disappointed in the level of service that my son was provided in terms of his education. I didn't feel like they were educating him, certainly not well. And there was a lot of crud that he was bringing home from the school. So it was twofold. There were a few specific incidents that occurred that finally convinced me I needed to try on homeschooling like a coat, which I did over the summer. I pretended that I was a homeschooler. I knew some people who were homeschoolers. Yeah. I went and got a couple workbooks for the kids to do. I literally tried it on like a coat. And
what year are we talking about here? Because what's really interesting about the homeschooling world is how much it has evolved over a relatively short period of time. So I'd like to pigeonhole the start date here.
So the start date would be either 2008 or 2009.
Okay, that's helpful.
And so I told my husband that I wanted to try homeschooling, and I literally said to him this: I think I could fail at homeschooling them and they still will be better off. And I stand by that even more today than back then. Yeah. Like, it was true back then, but it applies to so many more people today. Even the least adequate of parents, your child's better off not going to school. And the reason I say that is because our schools have now shown themselves to be centers of child abuse. Teaching children lies.
When you say our schools, let's define that. What do you mean by our schools? Do you mean the public schools, or are you making a broader statement?
I'm making a statement that the way that teachers are educated today defies logic. They are trained to lie to children. That's child abuse. Lying to a child is abuse. We should never.
But I'm going to make you take mystery out of these statements.
Okay, so the gender ideology that they're teaching in schools, it's in a lot of the textbooks now. The Marxism that somehow socialism works better than capitalism is an outright lie. There's absolutely no example of that to put proof to the claim in the real world.
Right.
And then all the things that they hide from the child. So the Bible is the best history book we have. It's the very best history textbook that we have. And they pretend that it's a book that doesn't exist or is just a collection of fairy tales. It's never been disproven, but they pretend that it has no relevance. It has all the relevance. Even if you just want to talk about Shakespeare, Dante, and the greatest writers. But now they're moving away from that and they're saying white guys aren't the greatest writers, right? So it's the whole thing has shifted. Now, I don't go after every school. I'm talking about school as an institution in general. And our struggle now is that so many Christian schools have modeled themselves after public school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a problem because the public school paradigm holds that there's a teacher at the blackboard or the whiteboard. She is the spigot of knowledge, and you can't get knowledge except via her or him.
Yeah.
Right?
I've often said, when my initiatives in education started in 1992, when we took the initiative to start a school in Orlando called the Geneva School, and people would ask questions like, well, are you going to be accredited? And back then accreditation was a state thing from the state. And I finally, it didn't take long, but I developed this statement that resonated easily with the people asking questions like that. We don't think it makes any sense to model or pursue accreditation or whatever the question nuance might be from an institution and a design that we're trying to get away from.
Of course.
It really defies logic, but it's not logic that's well thought through, and so it has to be explained.
Well, listen to this. There are business people who are now seeking to hire children out of high school. They do not want the college degree anymore because the college degree is sort of an affirmation of a limitation of thought. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
The longer a child stays in school, the less inquisitive that person is, the less thoughtful, the less able to engage in an exchange of ideas the person is, the more cemented that individual is in his thought patterns and his thoughts.
Yeah.
And so businesses that want to grow need to hire people who have a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of creativity, a little bit of problem solving. Homeschoolers have now proven that they are problem solvers, by and large, more than kids who attend an institution for, 7.5 hours a day. And so the universities, the grand universities, who shall remain nameless because who cares anymore, but even those had already started actively recruiting homeschoolers. As of like 10 years ago, it became known that they were recruiting homeschoolers because homeschoolers are outside the box thinkers, typically.
We see that in droves. The colleges that simply, our online school has over 10,000 students right now, and they line up at the door for our kids.
Sure.
Sure.
And you're teaching classics, which is
right. That's
which
right.
is where the seat of knowledge can be found, right? If you really want to go on a path of discovery, you start there. You look at you look at original documents.
We're teaching mastering language with Latin. There are a lot of things, and those aren't new things. Our listeners are for the most part informed there. Let's go in areas that you tell me, what is your message to the typical American, maybe the typical American Christian? And maybe it's beyond that geographically. I don't mean to limit you to America. I don't know enough about what your work does. So you answer.
Well, to the typical Christian, I would say that any school institution is anti-parent. They can't help it. They come between the child and the parent. They become the authority. You cede your authority. That's not God's design for the family. God in the Bible never says or indicates that school is the ultimate choice for the family. In fact, the reverse, the opposite. He puts the onus on the parents to teach the parents about God And in fact, isn't that what education is? Really, is the journey to discover God, right? Through his creation. That should be sort of one way of looking at
Understanding
education.
his creation and providence would be a way that I might say it.
I like it.
Yeah.
And so if that's the goal, my goodness, don't send your child to an institution that denies his very existence, certainly, that denies the validity of the Bible, that denies the existence of the Bible.
Yeah.
Now Oklahoma just passed a ruling that the Bible will be taught in schools. That's excellent. I don't know how you're going to get a Marxist teacher who disdains the Bible to teach it, but good luck with that. It's a step in the right direction. But my message to parents all over the world is don't send your children to an institution thinking that they're going to be educated.
Yeah.
School is not in the business of education. There's a difference. And if you think that school is in the business of education, you've been schooled and not educated, you're a product of that system.
Yeah. It is amazing how little time it takes, speaking generationally, to lose track of what is important and what is worthwhile.
Well, we've lost the family because of the schools.
Yeah.
The schools have adequately disrupted the family so that now we are struggling to maintain the family. We certainly have, in our culture, we have kind of a very nonchalant attitude towards family. There's elements in our culture that hate the family, that actively seek to destroy the family. But more than that, we have a disdain for children. We have an abject disdain for children. Why do we hate children so much that we consign them to a classroom for 7.5 hours a day? And then we're not finished. Now you're going to do homework. We just want to rob them of their childhoods. And it angers me. And so my message to parents is don't send your kids to school. Like, sure, give them stuff to study and make it fun for them, and give them classics when they get of an age where they're curious, because children are innately curious. That curiosity is God inspired, right? Because he wants them to seek him out.
Yeah.
And you should not get in the way of that by putting the child in a box.
I've said this here before. One of the really exciting things that we had going for us when we started the Geneva School in Orlando was that RC Invest Sproul were involved in it. And RC's summer before the school started was available in many respects. And so he would be the speaker at parent nights when we were recruiting. And that was
Oh my gosh.
And I remember it was in our family room. A mother, after he speaks, raised her hand and said, "So you've talked about this curiosity that children have. How do we instill that in our children?" And in typical RC style, he says, "It is not our job to instill it. God's given it to them. It's our job not to kill it."
Bingo. Bingo. But we no longer have faith in children. We think children are so stupid that we have to force feed them. They're not little birds.
Yeah.
And by the way, like, there are a lot of parents who force feed their children. No, you have to eat that. And I bridle against that because I tried that with my kids, and it was actually kind of funny. I made dinner and neither of my boys were eating it. And my husband, he waited like 15 minutes and then he couldn't take it anymore. And I was like, listen, if they don't want to eat it, they can go to bed hungry. That's fine. Because I had made dinner and I thought that was the way you do things. And within 15 minutes, my husband goes, "You want a hot dog? I'll go make you a hot dog." And then I literally thought, oh gosh, okay, checkmate on me. I'm gonna lose this argument every single time. And so I made the executive decision to never have that argument again. And you know what? That's been a very good decision for me.
That's funny. Tell me, in summary, before we move to another topic, how would you describe your mission to the families that you get a chance to influence with regard to education?
So I love that you say that, and I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a homeschool expo over the weekend, and I had a husband and wife come up to me and say to me, "You're the gal, you talked to us 4 years ago at this event, And the husband had said to me, you know, my two older boys are doing really well in school, but I'm hesitant to put the younger ones in school. Do you think I should take the older ones out of school too? But they're doing really well. And I had said to him, I don't know what you're waiting for. Take them out tonight. Like, don't even wait until the morning, make the decision and be done with it. And he did. And the whole family was there, and they have a business together now, and all the kids are involved in the business. And I saw all the kids there, and they are so, well, first of all, they're grateful to me for speaking so boldly to them, because I do have that habit of just speaking what I know to be true. Could I be wrong? It's not highly likely. But anyway, I'm just, and that's my greatest joy, is I want to save children from the abuse. That's my whole point.
Yeah.
And I know that people are in different circumstances and they have different predicaments, and I can't solve everybody's problems. However, school will never beat home education. It will never beat it. And if you're prioritizing your child, you got to get all the other stuff fixed so that you can prioritize your child.
Yeah, I like that. Let's let that sink in. That is really good. So you've been involved, along with Kevin, your husband, in Hollywood. And of course, I'm sitting here 3,000 miles away from Hollywood. It's not anything that I really understand. I've had
Nor should you.
children involved in various aspects of the entertainment world. So I'm not completely unfamiliar. What's it like being a Christian in Hollywood, and how do you see the whole aspect of the arts and entertainment winning the day and affecting culture in a way that does communicate the gospel?
Oh my gosh, I wish that I could see that. I can see it piecemeal. I think that there's a very evil spirit that has infected much of Hollywood, sadly. And I think that it's difficult for good people to even fathom the depths of depravity that exist. For us, my husband, when we first got married, we lived in New Zealand, and then we moved to Vancouver for 5 years when he was shooting a show up there. And so we really weren't much in Hollywood. We were apart, but we didn't do all of the Hollywood things because we didn't live there.
Yeah.
So I think that it was a gift that we were sort of held apart. It was a gift that I was given that binary choice when my husband became so ill, and it was great that I made the decision that I made, because once my priorities were, and I will say, like, up until that point, I had been pondering how it was going to look. Like, I was going to live in LA because I still had my career, but I was going to be flying to New Zealand, which is only 13 hours of flight overnight. With the time change, there's a day somehow in between that you either gain or lose going one way or the other. Like, but I was trying to figure that out. Like, okay, I'd do an audition, then I'd get on a plane. What if I got a call back? Then I'd have to go back. And the moment that I made the decision to leave my career, at least temporarily, and my agent said to me, you know what this means, right? And her implication was, you're walking away. And she was right to a certain degree. But by doing that, all of the chaos in my brain cleared. There's no reason to juggle. I can't juggle anyway. I'm very bad at it. And so once I made that decision, that cleared that up. So Kevin and I, really Kevin, because he was the working actor in the family, made a very conscious decision when he was presented with a very pro-God, very Christian script. In fact, the movie's called What If? I highly recommend it. It's an excellent family movie. And it's the first Hollywood caliber, unabashedly Christian film, I believe, that was ever made.
That's wonderful.
you know, if you don't go back 50 years, right? When Hollywood used to be, you know, much more traditionally value based. So when he did that movie, he realized that he could be, in a sense, a force for good. And it wasn't that he didn't know that before. It was that the two shows that he was on, he was good. They were good in terms of, you know, he was a good person. He depicted good morals. The shows did the same. And that was sort of a given. So every time that they wanted to put some nefarious plot point in, like, oh, maybe he's gay or maybe whatever, he was like, yeah, we're not doing that. And so the shows were good. They were good-hearted. I can't say the same for the spin-off shows from Hercules, but certainly Hercules, the show, is sort of a morally principled show. There's no real violence. It's all sort of comedy violence. And so he always had that worldview in his work, but then he became more pointed with it. And so when God's Not Dead came around, he was like, yeah, and he did it for a penny. Like, he did it for basically very little pay because he really liked the script. And he was not an owner, sadly, because the movie blew up and it made over $100 million.
Well. Yeah.
But regardless, that sort of cemented him on this path of doing good with the movies that he does. And so fast forward, we had 3 kids. My kids' faith was being challenged by the culture several times a day. And I was in the car driving, I remember, and I was thinking, you know, it's funny, atheism is a faith. Atheists don't have their faith challenged. Nobody goes at them and says, why don't you believe the Bible? I mean, it's so obviously true. No one, you know, confronts them or challenges them. I thought that would be a good movie. I would like to see that. Oh, wait, I should write that movie.
That sounds like a great idea.
And so I wrote the movie, and within 2 weeks we were funded, which never happens. It's entirely a God thing. Made the movie, brought it to theaters. Nobody thought that it would perform. It performed. It did second at the box office, up against Thor Ragnarok.
Wow.
And that's a God thing, because that's not me. I was just really thrilled to be able to be a part of it. And so that's what started Sorbo Studios, and really what started us as missional, more missional, really, than Hollywood.
Yeah. That's
although I should say Hollywood is missional.
Yeah.
Every film is a faith-based movie.
Yeah.
They just have a different faith.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, thank you for what you do. Keep it up. It is wonderful to have some really good options these days for entertainment that is thought-provoking in the right way. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Can I encourage your listeners, go to sorbostudios.com, sign up for our newsletters. We send out uplifting. We like to do uplifting and inspirational content, and that includes our newsletters as well as our films. And and by the way, all of my stuff, the homeschooling, is there as well. sorbostudios.com.
Thank you, Sam. sorbostudios.com, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Folks, thanks again for joining us on another episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.